Hello and good evening, everybody. Tonight is October 15th, and this evening's topic is mindful eating for real life. So, how to nourish without obsessing. And if you've joined me in some previous presentations before, then you know that I've talked about this a little bit here and there, but hopefully we'll have a few new nuggets of information on this topic in particular. And of course, as always, at the very end, you can feel free to ask me any questions that come to mind about this or other nutrition topics. I always want to leave that time available. So without further ado, let's get started. As I start with every presentation, I do like to remind you that the quality of your calories matters, especially when we're eating fewer calories, then you really want to maximize that quality. And mindfulness can use that approach as well. So hopefully you'll see how that can apply throughout this. So what we're going to cover today is defining mindful eating, just so we have that baseline there. Also, how that applies in the context of weight management, some practical strategies. So I give a few hints on some day-to-day ways that you can implement that. And we'll quickly cover how to reframe food guilt, because I do think that is a very common experience that we all have. We want to feel guilty about something we've chosen to eat. I'm sure you've seen people who say that, oh, I've been so bad today, and they're talking about their food choices. And so it's always a good idea to reframe that. And like I said, at the end, if you do have questions, I'm here and open to answer them. So let's get started. To define mindful eating, in one particular article, I saw a pretty decent expression of this, which is non-judgmental awareness of the cues, so external and internal cues, influencing the desire to eat, food choice, quantity, and then also the manner in which food is consumed. And so the aim is for us to be more aware overall of what foods we're eating. And so you can almost think of it as sort of a journalistic approach in where you hear that who, what, when, why, and how. Well, it's, what are we eating? Why are we eating? How much are we eating? And then also touching on factors that apply to that food. What does it taste like? How does it appear? And some descriptors, almost like I will tell people, think like a food critic. And that is actually a bit of a mindfulness approach. And mindfulness is not just being used in the context of food or people who are trying to approach nutrition, but it does seem to be used in more areas of healthcare. So you may hear it talked about in other avenues, but still with that healthcare angle. I did want to mention, though, it is not, so mindful eating is not a specific diet. It is also not aimed on perfection. In fact, it's almost an anti-perfection approach. And it doesn't really have a new list of rules to follow. And with that in mind, I also wanted to mention it's not standardized. The last time I checked in on this, there is no standard implementation of mindfulness. There are a few techniques and suggestions that you'll see, but you may see completely different or maybe some additional ideas that still approach mindful eating from a healthy perspective, but isn't from a standardized list of rules or approach. Overall, though, whatever approach you want to take with mindfulness, it is associated with a higher diet quality, so those higher quality calories, and can help some people with with controlling any type of overeating behaviors or desire. In the context of weight management, we already know that for most people, GLP-1 medications can help control appetite, which is great because if your mind is off of the hunger, then if you are using mindfulness, it can help you with making better food choices. And also it gives you that time and opportunity to make sustainable changes for the future. So mindfulness is very helpful in that type of approach where you can now say, I'm going to really think about what I'm choosing to eat. because I'm not preoccupied with the desire to eat quite as much. Also, because so many people, especially when they are trying to lose weight, will feel this sense of food guilt, or perhaps will try and overly restrict food, whether it's healthy or not. Sometimes that can turn into this endless cycle of restriction, or I'm not going to eat this, not another day will I eat this food, but then eating it, feeling guilty. Because you're feeling guilty, you have that emotional response, and then that's a trigger to eating it again, or maybe overeating, and then it turns into that cyclical pattern that many people feel trapped in sometimes. And so overall, mindfulness can help recognize true hunger versus emotional hunger. And one way that I've mentioned approaching this as well is if you feel like you think you're hungry, but maybe aren't quite sure, you can always ask yourself, would I eat? And then think of a boring food for you. So would I eat whatever that food is? And if your answer is no, then most likely you're not truly hungry. If your answer is yes, and it's a food that completely disinterests you, it probably means you are hungry. So that can be a very helpful approach. Also, mindfulness is aimed to help us get some more satisfaction with the smaller portions and allowing ourselves to enjoy what we're eating, even if the amount is smaller. And because of these and other mindfulness approaches, that overall can help with weight maintenance. So how would we implement that in real life? And I have some practical strategies here along with the next couple of slides. And so first, get in touch with what true hunger feels like. If my previous suggestion of would I eat a boring food doesn't quite work, you could also use what this example of a hunger scale, which I have put on at least one other presentation before, where a 1 is where you feel like you are starving, and a 10 feels like you have eaten so much that you might be sick. And so if that scale works for you better after reading over some of this, then you know that if you're feeling around a 3 or a 4, so a little bit hungry, stomach is growling, then you're starting to feel very hungry at a 4, allow yourself to eat at that time. But take your time when eating and stop at a 6 or 7 where you're feeling slightly full, maybe not completely full, or slightly, but just ever so slightly uncomfortable. I do recognize, though, that again, as I mentioned before, people who are on GLP-1 medications may not have as high of an appetite, but if that's not quite happening for you as strongly, or if maybe it's later in the week where I know that that certain effect starts to wean over time. So if you're on day 6, maybe the day or two before your next GLP-1 injection, then this would be maybe a time where you can implement that and try and tune into that. Another strategy is to simply slow down. Try and take 20 or 30 minutes to finish your meal. Many of us don't allow that amount of time. We take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and we try to finish as quickly as possible to get to whatever we need to do next. I know this doesn't always happen, especially if you do have a very busy day, but if you have a meal where you can allow yourself that time, do so. And one way to slow down where you don't have to necessarily set a timer, although I know some people who do, put the fork down between bites. Or if you're right-handed, try and eat with your left hand. Anything to help slow down the whole process of eating, because so many of us are just, again, mindlessly doing it, where we're chewing our one bite and already we're cutting the next one to be ready. But we don't have to be that fast. We can slow that down. If that's not really a problem, the other idea is to reduce distractions. Are we eating while we're working in the middle of the day? Or maybe we're driving to whatever our next appointment is and eating whatever it is we can. Try to reduce your distractions as much as possible. Set aside some time where the focus is or can be more on the food. I don't want you to necessarily feel bored, but try and find a way where you do have to be a little more focused on food. You can still be listening to, say, a podcast or something that interests you, but again, try and think like a food critic, even if that would help. And if somebody had to ask you to describe your meal later in the day, how would you be able to describe that? Would you have been not overly distracted where you could take the time and be able to explain what it was you ate? Strategy number 4, and this is why I have the flag of Switzerland on here, is to be food neutral. So as I talked about food guilt here a little bit earlier, and we'll touch on it again, try and avoid as best you can labeling a food as bad or good. Instead, if you are getting ready to eat, take a time and ask yourself, how does this nourish me? What are the benefits I'm getting from X, Y, and Z? And while I don't think anyone could call a donut health food, I still wouldn't want you to necessarily label it as bad, but know that it's not going to benefit you quite as much as something else. So that may still help you in deciding, I would like to try something that nourishes me. Or if you are treating yourself, then just remind yourself, this is not going to be necessarily the most nourishing choice, but I'm allowing that just one time this week, and I'm going to make better, some healthy choices later on. Maybe not better, because again, that's assigning that non-neutrality there. And this is what I'm talking about with allowing yourself to enjoy some treats. So not necessarily bad food, but aim for what I call the 5-star experience. If you want to enjoy a chocolate, enjoy the best chocolate that you can and just eat it in a smaller quantity instead of having maybe a 1-star chocolate that you don't really like, but it's there. So allow yourself to enjoy something that truly is enjoyable in all of its facets and not just a quick fix. And the last strategy I have here is to plan ahead. So if you know you're going to be having a busy day, make sure that you've got those pre-made snacks or ready-to-go snacks like a Kind bar or even a meal replacement drink if that's that kind of day. Plan ahead and have those ready to go so you don't have to make last-minute decisions. If you know that you're going to be going to a restaurant or somewhere, try and, if they're available, check those menus ahead of time and look at that when you're not hungry and decide on something that you're going to choose ahead of time. So that way you'll already be prepared knowing what you want. And as I mentioned, food guilt, in this context, it is not allowed. And so the first thing is give yourself some self-compassion. If you feel like you slipped up on one particular day and you're talking, negatively to yourself, ask yourself, is this how I would talk if a friend of mine were on this same weight loss journey with me and they felt like that they had slipped up? Is this how I would let them talk to themselves, or would I talk to them like this? And if the answer is no, then remember, talk to yourself as if you are your own friend, because you are. And so be your own advocate, be your own cheerleader there. And remember that it's about patterns and not being perfect every day. Nobody is necessarily perfect every single day. I know I'm not. And so it's a very good idea to just remember how you did overall. And if you feel like you're struggling because the very last thing you ate in the day wasn't maybe necessarily the healthiest choice, look back and ask yourself, what did I do well today? And can I do those good choices more often tomorrow? And it's all about that sort of 1% better every day mindset that can be really, really helpful. So let's talk about goals then. We talked about some of those real-time strategies, and so maybe for this next week, try and pick one of those to try. Maybe you're going to try and use the hunger scale during some of your meals this week. What about slowing down if that's a problem for you? Or try to assign when you eat to be less distracted. And of course, if the labeling food good or bad is something that's become very habitual for you, then try and avoid using those terms. Those are out of your vocabulary for the week. And as always, if you know that you have a tendency to have a very busy schedule, plan ahead of time and be ready for those hurdles. So try and pick one of these that you know is accessible to you, but also one that you think would be very beneficial. I'd be very interested to know if you try one and if it really helps with getting your overall patterns a little bit more sustainable and long-term healthier dining patterns. To put all of this together, just remember that the sustainable weight loss, it is about building those long-term habits. And mindful eating can help build those habits from a healthy strategy instead of trying to build it from a restrictive or guilt-ridden strategy. And for this next week, or maybe beyond, try one of those strategies we talked about, or look up some online in case none of these really sort of worked for you. Try and find one that does and give it a shot this week and see how well that works out for you. And as always, because I emphasize this much because I know even the most well-meaning of us tend to have food guilt. Remember that that is not helpful and can really just be harmful in the long run. And with that, as always, I like to open this up for questions. So feel free to hit down at the bottom left-hand part of the screen if you have a specific question about this topic or any other nutrition topic that you may have at this time. You can choose to be anonymous or you can have your name, but most likely I will say your name so you know that I'm addressing your question in particular. And of course, if you think of a question later, but didn't have a chance to ask it this evening, that's fine. Please reach out to the Premier Weight Loss staff because we are happy to get that question answered for you. And I will wait for just a minute or two to give you time to write it down, and then we'll go from there. Okay, and with that, I don't believe we have any questions, so I hope that you have a wonderful evening, and thank you for your time. I hope that you gained something from this. If there is ever anything you need or you do have questions later, please reach out again to that Premier Weight Loss staff. They can get in touch with me or answer that question as well. And I hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of the evening and rest of the week, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.